This is Love Well, presented by Love Now Media. I'm Helanah.
I'm Greg. I'm a poet. I'm an educator for the Philadelphia region. I thought it was important to do this show and be involved because we often have these conversations internally about love and wellness and how relationships work together, and I thought it would be great to actually present that to the community.
Okay, and I'm Helanah, and I'm a wellness educator, really working in the lane of like self-care and how it becomes very practical and how it becomes accessible for minority communities. And I felt like it was important to do this show because wellness is something that's really taboo. It's a word we use a lot, you know, hashtag self-care Sundays, but I think it's hard to break it down and what it really means. Yes. So I'm excited today because we're gonna talk about gender roles, which is kind of a little like pivot. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts on gender roles is it depends on what you saw coming up. You know, we live in a different time. It's 2018, it's not 1958.
Okay.
Gender roles have definitely shifted. What are your thoughts on gender roles?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not really for the gender roles thing. I think it should just be roles. It should just be like whatever that person who's in the relationship can do the best. And so I think that roles are just something that change. They change throughout a relationship, and I think they also really should be based off of whatever that person does best. And they should just bring those strengths and that beauty and that amazing creativity or planning skills or whatever to the relationship. I don't think it's that big of a deal.
So like based on what Helanah just spoke about, right? Talking about basically entering a relationship and interacting with each other based on your strengths and not just the traditions around gender roles. If you think about it, you think about masculine energy, you think about feminine energy, those are often defined based on adjectives, you know, or emotions, right? You're talking about aggression or assertiveness, usually is seen to be deemed a man trait, right? Or a male trait. And we live in a society now where anybody, any person, no matter how they identify, can be assertive, can be aggressive. So when you think about even performative masculinity, what it looks like and how it relates to patriarchy, right? Patriarchy was often this thing that said, oh, men are supposed to do this. Men are supposed to be the provider. Men are supposed to clean up the house, supposed to be the carpenter. Woman's supposed to stay in the kitchen, take care of the kids, bring the kids into the world, and all these things. And now we're just living in a different society where we're starting to think about these things differently and say, why are we putting so many limits on our human experience?
I think that's an interesting idea, but I think that for some people, gender roles are really something that they cling to. For some people, it's very important actually to have identified roles as who does what in the household. And I think for some people who need that structure, gender roles is something they really lean on, right? And so it's a difference between kind of the new age way of thinking about gender roles, but then also like the old school, which is kind of what you defined. Honestly, I think now it's really important to be flexible, especially if you're in a relationship. Like you may come with these certain expectations, and we've talked about this before, how I grew up. I come from a long lineage of women, strong women, entrepreneurial women, and so that's a big part of who I am. And so for me to partner with somebody who couldn't be compassionate towards my leadership skills, my assertiveness, what might be looked as aggression in the boardroom or my corporate background would probably have been a problem, honestly. And I think for you, what did you see growing up the most?
I saw growing up in a different way. You know, you come from the community I came from. I'm born in Germantown in Philadelphia. And the way we looked at the gender roles, the way a young lady was supposed to perform versus a young man in real world context, you know, or even the thing, boys, you shouldn't cry. You're a punk if you cry, right? These things are now being rearranged, redefined, and reimagined in our society because we realize that we're doing more damage to young people in general, whether it's girl, boy, however you identify, it's that simple, you know. And I think it's very important that we continue to like entertain these conversations and be more reflective on what it looks like. Now, there are some people who need that in a relationship because that's their upbringing, and you have to respect that. Everybody is not going to be on the same accord, even with what we're saying, right? We're saying be flexible, be open-minded. But there are some people who feel safe and they feel comfortable. It's convenient for them to actually use these gender roles in their relationships. Growing up where I grew up in our community, you identify as a girl, boy, and now it's them, they. So it's a lot of things happening and shifting when we talk about gender roles. It's fluid, it's transforming, it's becoming more of an open-minded conversation. But there are some people who need that construct so they can actually have the structure. That's where they're comfortable at. That's where they find convenience at. And that's just what they saw growing up in their household.
Right. I think in conjunction with that it's important to merge the two. Right, so that the old gender roles may not necessarily be applicable to certain partners in the relationship, but that it's important to also be fluid in those gender roles, if that makes sense. So, for example, what we do, right? So, in our counseling and figuring out how we're going to work best together as a married couple, the reality is there are a lot of things you have to do as a person, as an adult. Right?
You have to.
And then there are also a lot of things you have to do as a couple.
Yes.
And so, everything from handling family dynamics to retirement to life insurance to savings to buying cars and buying houses, building a family, right? There's so many different things that you come together to do as a couple. I think it's important really to just lean on the strengths of each individual person, and to be cool and be chill with those roles changing, right? So you may start off where you do the dishes and I cook the food. Some people may think that's a very traditional gender role. So one question that we've been asked is kind of do we express quote unquote masculine or feminine traits opposite, right? Am I more masculine? Is he more feminine in certain places? And I would say yes. And I would say that Greg probably cries more than I do.
A proud crier.
He is a proud crier. He's an artist. He's very expressive.
I'm an artist.
I love that. I love that about you, him. And me, I don't know. I'm kind of a straight shooter. I'm very poised. I have a corporate background. It's not a big deal to me,
Yeah, she loves me through it. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yes.
And yeah, I do cry. So what? All right.
I cry too, but I think
she do. When she cry though, it all catches up. It's bam, But no, to say what you. Just back to the gender role thing. I think the key is the thing that I think we're really honing in on and focusing on is
flexibility.
Flexibility, being open-minded because people change and grow.
Circumstances change and grow. And,
and it might be a moment where I'm cooking and she's doing the dishes, right?
I can't wait for that moment. I cook all the time.
It actually might happen, and I just fall into this habit based on the needs of the us in our relationship.
And I'm sure when we have children, right? Because we want to have a family, that might change again, and so. There's nothing else.
I'm just thinking about how many times a parent has messed up with their children and raising their children or running the household based on a gender role that they didn't want to move from.
Yeah. Now, I think that does bring up a good point. I know we have to wrap up soon, but I think that does bring up a good point around, does acting in gender roles mean that sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do? Right? Let's say that your spouse doesn't want to do laundry and you don't want to do the laundry. Well, somebody's got to do the laundry unless you're going to pay for the laundromat to do it for you. So I think that the flexibility is in okay, if there's something we both don't want to do that falls in somebody's particular assumed role, you got to figure it out, Otherwise, you're going to be having stinky socks.
True. And then there's a lot of freedom in being open-minded and flexible towards this conversation around gender roles and how you interact in your relationship.
I think our biggest takeaway when it comes to gender roles and how we express them in our relationship is do what it takes to make it work. Right? At the end of the day, be flexible, be open-minded, and keep the conversation going around what works.
And remember, human beings cry. Everyone cries.